Welcome to POC test of small and medium-sized campus scenarios. Today the topic of our lecture is wired Dot1x authentication. Our test purpose is to verify that Huawei Cloudcampus solution supports wired network access authentication in Dot1x authentication mode. Wired Dot1x authentication is applicable to enterprise branches and large and medium-sized enterprises that have higher requirements on network security and require identity authentication for access. And let's take a look of our test environment. Our network consists of an AR or a firewall, which play the role of gateway and DHCP server. Then its downlink is a switch, and this switch is connected to a personal computer as the terminal. Then let's take a look of the test steps. First, we need to create an authentication rule. Then we bind the authentication port. And third, we configure authentication users and authentication and authorization policies. In the fourth step, we connect the terminal to the switch port and enter an incorrect username and password. And at last, we enter the correct username and password to test the connectivity. And our expected result is that first, the terminal user fails Dot1x authentication and cannot access the network. Then after enter the correct username and password, the terminal user will succeed in Dot1x authentication and can access the network. Here are some test precautions. First, before access authentication, the wired authentication service must be enabled on the terminal. Second, during authentication, you can view terminal authentication logs on the NC controller to rectify faults and view authentication results. And at last, here are some advice for troubleshooting. First, if the authentication account cannot be configured on the terminal, please check whether the wired authentication service is enabled on the terminal. And second, if the terminal authentication fails and the error message is PIP authentication link is abnormal, generally the terminal uses the old TLS 1.0 or 1.1 protocol. You need to enable related configurations on the controller to support the authentication. Okay, now we have switched to the page of IMS Latency Campus, and first we need to go to the site configuration, and we need to set the authentication rule on switch. At wired authentication, we create a new rule, which name is wired1x. We select a 02.1x authentication, and we need to choose a radio server. Then we need to select bypass policy, and we click OK. Our next step is to add a specific interface to bind the rule. Here we select access 1, and we select gigabit internet 005. Okay. Next, we are going to user management to create a authentication user. We can just call it user1, and we set the password. Okay, now the user has been created. Then we go to authentication and authorization rule. We need to create a Dot1x authentication rule. Please note that at access mode, we select wired. At match account, we select user 1 and add it to the list. Okay. Then we need to set a authorization rule. Select wide, and also at match account we select user 1. And at authorization result we select permit access. Okay. Now we are going to test the wired Dot1x authentication. Okay, now we switch to the screen of our terminal. We go to adapter settings first, and we select the SNet3, select the properties, and select the authentication. Here we can enable IEEE Dot1x authentication. We click additional settings, and we can select user authentication here. Then we enter a wrong username and password first, and we click OK. Now we can see the PC is attempting to authenticate and connect to the network. We open the CMD and enter ipconfig. We can see here the SNet3 has not been authenticated, and we do a ping operation to ping the IP address of the controller. It shows that request timeout, which means we have failed to connect to the network. Then we open up the properties again. This time we enter a correct username and password. Then we click OK. Here we can see it has been enabled. This time we go to CMD and enter ipconfig again. Here we can see the IP address the PC got from the network, which is in 23.1.1 network segment. Then we ping the IP address of the controller again. Okay, now we get the reply from the controller, which means we have connected to the network successfully. Now we switch back to the page of Campus. We go to Monitoring, Terminal Authentication Logs, and select Radios Logging and Logout Logs. Here we can see the wrong username we used, which is user2, has failed the authentication, and the correct username, user1, has been successfully authenticated and authorized. So that's all contents of today's lecture, and we hope you enjoyed this video, and see you next time.